Thank you, everybody, for joining the Thoughtful Podcast, a podcast where we talk about mindsets and everything in between. So, today is a very special episode. We have a special guest with us, Elaine Montilla, who I will be handing the floor to shortly so she can introduce herself. But before we bring in Elaine, I wanted to spend a couple of minutes just talking about, the overwhelming support you've given me in the last two episodes. We've gotten so much interesting feedback and outreach and support. Thank you. This really helps a lot. What we're trying to do here is help people bring a better version of themselves out to the world, and we can't do that if we have a limited reach. So thank you so much, all of those of you who have shared this podcast or tagged us in different social media. Thank you so much. So without any further ado, Elaine, welcome to the Thought Fuel podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So, Elaine, who are you?
Hmm. Very interesting question. Elaine Montilla, born and raised in the Dominican Republic, and I know we'll get to some of the details later on. I've actually been working in technology for over 20 years. I am the founder of 5X Minority, a company and a social media brand that's dedicated to empowering women in technology. And I'm also a senior executive working in the ed tech field.
Excellent, excellent. So, I imagine, so between these two roles that you have as a founder and also as an executive, it sounds like you live a very purpose-driven life. You really do navigate yourself in a space where there's not a lot of women, right? And I know that we've had a lot of robust conversations about this because you were a TEDx speaker at one of our events and you
Yeah.
gave this amazing TED talk about the topic. So, can you share a little bit about the TED talk you gave?
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you for that opportunity. It was really life changing. My topic was centered on the value of mentoring women and underrepresented minorities in tech. You know, Nico, from the moment that I came to this country, I always felt like I couldn't see myself in others. I couldn't see any role models or people who sounded or looked like me. And I always wonder if something was wrong with me, until I realized that, a lot of us need a lot of guidance and help. And we don't get to that point until it's sometimes a bit later.
Excellent, excellent. Yeah. And I know we talk a lot about mindsets on this podcast, and we always assume that, and a lot of the talk that we do on here is about figuring yourself out and figuring what you want out of life, shifting your mindset, your focus, manifesting, talking about limited beliefs. But
Yeah.
as you do all those things that are very internal and very self-driven, you know, the world and the universe finds a way and it conspires to bring people in your life that can help you in your journey. Because when you have that amazing energy where you actually are driven and you really want to achieve something and you're a walking billboard about it,
Hmm.
you'll find your way on your journey. You're going to find people that are going to really want to help you. And
Yeah.
they manifest themselves as mentors, as role models, connectors. So tell us a little bit about that journey, right? Did you have,
Yeah.
obviously, being a woman in tech, did you have somebody in the family that was in IT or technology, or did you have
Yes.
a role model?
Yeah. Oh my God. There is so much I want to say about that. But the first thing that I want to say is that it's a journey, and it really took me years to get to that point that you're talking about, where I understand that the universe is conspiring to help me. There were many years of me having so much conditioned thinking that I couldn't even dream big enough. I couldn't even think. Like, if you see me now as a CTO for a company, I couldn't even dream that that was possible for someone who looked like me. And so early on in my journey, mind you, I moved to the United States when I was 17 years old, and I did not speak a word of English. And so the first shock for me was, wow, this is another language. I speak Spanish. I finished high school. I'm going into college. And I swear to you, I did not understand the words that people were saying in the classroom when I went to college. And so that was a big journey that plays into you believing that maybe something is wrong with you, that maybe you don't belong. And so I went through many years of, we call it the disease to please, trying to please everybody, trying to fit in. I remember changing my hair, changing the way I would speak. Um, but my brother is my savior because my brother was in technology. And I remember watching my brother, he would bring a computer and open it, and I would just watch him change parts and take memory sticks out. And I would ask him questions. And that's actually what started my love for technology. I was very curious, and he was a gamer too. So I remember being around him and saying, oh, this is fun. It looks like fun. Why can't I do it? At that point, I didn't think, oh, you're going to be the only girl in the classroom taking programming courses. Or you're going to be the only woman in the room when there's a meeting. I didn't know any of that, which was an advantage because I was fearless into thinking, oh, I can do this. I have a lot of girls that I mentor now, and they're like, Elaine, I don't think I can do this because they have access to more information than I did when I was growing up.
Yeah, yeah, and you touched on a lot of interesting topics there, and I feel like one of them, which you didn't describe it as imposter syndrome, but
Oh boy.
there's definitely a ton of themes there. Tell us a little bit about that. Obviously, when you're the only person in the room that looks the way you look, or you're the only female, or you're the only person there with an accent, it always makes you think that, oh, do I belong here? How do I navigate
Yeah.
around this? Is what I'm saying making sense to these people? You know, do I need to change the way I speak just to appease them, to please them, right? Have you
Yeah.
experienced that?
I remember vividly that when I would speak, people would stare at my lips. And I felt uncomfortable because I felt like they were trying to understand what I was saying. And I felt like maybe I shouldn't speak. Maybe I should just be quiet because I'm giving other people work that they don't want. They need to understand what I was saying. So I think that was the first part where I was like, oh, I don't know if I should do this. People, maybe I'm not capable of achieving anything because of how long it's taking me to learn English to begin with, but it's amazing how things change. And so I want to share first that imposter syndrome is not something that goes away forever. It's something that I have felt even recently being a chief technology officer because there is so much conditioned thinking that we grew up with. And I can tell you, I have spent the last 5 to 8 years unlearning a lot of things that I was told growing up. Things that my mom would tell me because, of course, she didn't know any better. Religion, commercials, TV, friends, teachers, politicians, and so I spent a lot of time trying to understand. Okay, who is Elaine, and what do I believe? What am I thinking? So I remember going into rooms where I would not feel like I belong because no one sounded like me, no one looked like me. I was usually the only woman in the room, or one out of maybe two. And sometimes it makes you feel like, oh, I don't know, maybe I'm not good enough in this, male dominated world. And also the fact that we don't sound like them. I don't speak like men. And so my approach was always very different, which is one of the things that I focus on now. Passionate leadership is what I practice every day. And so I still have moments that I go through it, but let me tell you what helped me. It was actually a therapist.
Yeah.
I met a therapist who said, Elaine, this is what I want you to do. I want you to start writing down every single one of your accomplishments. Find a notepad. I don't care where you do it. Start writing down the things that you're accomplishing. And if I find that document today, Nicos, it goes back to like 10 years. I can tell you 2001, what did I do that year? Because I write it down all the time. And so how does that help me? When I feel imposter syndrome, because you feel it when it's coming up, I go to that document, it's in my Dropbox now, And I go back to 2023 and I read all the amazing things that I completed. And I do that every year. And I've had that document for years now. And that's one of the tools that really helps me deal with imposter syndrome today.
Yeah. So you touched upon two things that I definitely want to address. One
Okay.
being that you have to unlearn certain things, right? Because, we constantly like say, hey, you got to learn this, you got to learn that. But a big part of this is the unlearning process, right? And Bharat Nain, who was our guest during episode 1, we
Mhm.
actually spoke a lot about therapy and about childhood trauma and how that kind of defines who you are as an adult. And sometimes you really need to do a lot of introspection as an adult to kind of figure out why you're feeling the way you're feeling and why
Yeah.
you're reacting to certain situations like the way you are. And it's not just from a career standpoint. It's not just like when you're interacting with your colleagues. This has an
Yeah.
impact about your relationship with your family, with your
With
significant
everyone.
other, your kids, everyone. So I definitely want to make it clear, right? This is definitely an environment where we encourage therapy where it's needed. There's again, this isn't the Joe Rogan podcast. I'm not going to tell everybody to jump in a cold plunge, although that does help a lot, right? There's a lot of different ways that you can shift your mindset. And sometimes some of us need more help than others. And
Yeah.
sometimes you don't need to do it alone. You don't. And
And
there's no
you
shame in that.
and you know what's interesting? One of the things that helped me with that was the beginning of my spiritual practice and learning about teachers like Eckhart Tolle and Wayne Dyer. And I remember in my office, I had a sign at the door outside and it said, "Don't believe everything you think." And I still have it here. It's in my bedroom because now I work from home. And that is actually what changed my life. I began to question my thoughts, which is something that most people don't do, because sometimes you don't even know that there's two of you. There's the one that's thinking and the one that knows that you're thinking. I hope I'm not going too deep here, but I really started to question my thoughts and ask myself, do you believe that? Because I had a lot of beliefs that came from my mom and my
Yeah.
grandma. And so I just automatically adopted them, but they're not. And so the process of unlearning to me, Nikos, is even more important than the things that I'm learning now. And you know me, I love education.
Yeah.
I'm always listening to a podcast like yours. And so it took a lot of years and a lot of work and a lot of reinforcement and a lot of meditation for me to start asking myself, is it true? That thought that just came to your mind, is it true? And then to question it and then to follow it instead of just blindly leaving.
Agreed, 100%. And meditation for a lot of people means something different. And the topic did actually come up during our first episode. And I know because meditation is something different for different people. So when you say you meditate, what's your process to meditate? Like, I know that you live somewhere where there's beautiful nature. Do you head out in nature? Do you
Yeah.
stay in the house? Do you get a yoga mat? How do you meditate?
I have different ways of doing it depending on my day. But something that I do every morning is I meditate as soon as I wake up, and
Yeah.
that is guided meditation. And so I have many apps. I choose which app I want in the morning. Insight Timer is the one I use the most, and I have guided meditations. I started doing also breath work, which I'm loving recently. Sometimes I will do a walking meditation if I have a break in the middle of the day. I find a walking guided meditation, and I would do that. And also mindfulness, I connect that with meditation because in the middle of the day, I try to make time to just be still and do nothing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess, you've obviously been very successful in your career. I mean, every time I log into LinkedIn, you're being awarded a different award for either mentorship or being a great role model. But and again, I really do. know that you've been a great role model and a mentor for people, but
Mm,
what have role models and mentors played in your career?
mm. Wow, huge, huge, huge.
Loaded question.
I know, and when I think about mentorship, I don't only think about the people who maybe were more senior than me who mentor me, but also the reverse mentorship that I've
Mhm.
received from people that report to me. And so I'm really grateful. I can tell you that when I started working in technology, I could never see myself at the next level. I could never see when I was a supervisor, I never thought I could be a manager. I was just working. Like
Yeah.
one thing that happens when you're an immigrant and Latina and lesbian is that you need to be visible. And in order for you to be visible, you have to do something extraordinary, right? So I had to work more than anyone else. I had to put more hours than anyone else. And I was so focused on the work that I never saw myself as being a director or a CIO. And so that's when the mentors come in. I had a mentor at work who would always say, I'm going to give you this, Elaine, because I know you could do it. And I would always be in shock, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to do this? I don't think I can. But knowing that someone believed in me gave me the confidence that I didn't have to know that I can do it myself. And you won't believe how many times that happened that my mentor would call me and say, why don't you think you could do it? Of course you can. Let me show you how. Or, because it's not always positive, let me talk
Yeah.
about some of the negatives too. I had moments when I could, for example, I had an email from a faculty member who was very angry, and I responded right away. Talk about reacting instead of responding. I reacted right away. And my mentor called me into his office the next day and say, let's read this email, Elaine. What do you think happened here? But those are the little things that a mentor can do for you. I never sent an email angry after that
Yeah.
day. It only happened once. And
And this was
so
many
that
years ago, right? I imagine,
and
right?
that was many years ago. Oh my God, that was more than 15 years ago. I have never sent an email while I was angry. And so when I mentor young girls, that's the joy that I get knowing that maybe not today, but maybe in 10 years, they'll remember something that I said. They'll remember. And I got a message today on LinkedIn from one of my mentees who's graduating. And it just makes me feel so proud because I know how it feels to have someone that believes in you, you
Oh,
know?
100%. 100%.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I've ever discussed this before on the podcast. So I'm originally from Cyprus. I was born here in the US, but I lived half my life here in the US and half my life in Cyprus. And I left very young from the US. I left around 8 years old. And then I moved to Cyprus, been back and forth so many times, lived a couple of years in England. But the bulk of my professional experience was in Cyprus prior to moving to the US. So
Oh,
I always had this, although I came back to the US this time around for a life changing career opportunity, I always had this limiting belief that I'm going to go into this new role and I would speak up. And because I come from Cyprus and Cyprus isn't the biggest place on earth. It's one of the
hmm.
smallest island nations in the world. We're less than 1 million people, and I always thought that I would speak up, and people would be like, "Oh, what does he know? What does he know?" But I found that what I once you had the right people around you, you would see that they would want to hear what you said. They would appreciate your different perspective. And as long as you showed that you cared, people would rally and champion for you to be successful. And I found that encountering amazing mentors and role models, and I'm 40 years old and I still have role
Yeah.
models, right? And I have role models at work and personal life. I have mentors. I have a lot of reverse mentors as well. I have a lot of younger people that inspire me daily that are much younger than me
Yeah.
that get all this stuff done. And
I love that story, Nikos, because you just reminded me of an instance where I had a manager. We were at a meeting and I wouldn't speak much. And I remember having an idea and speaking and people ignoring me, and a manager saying, wait a minute, let's hear what Elaine has to say. And he probably doesn't even remember that he did that, but it changed the way I saw myself because as a senior person, he wanted to hear what I had to say. And I think what happens to a lot of us women and immigrants is that there is this fear that we cannot get over sometimes. This fear of, oh my God, if I say something, they're going to pay attention to me. So we don't say anything. And the goal is to feel that fear, right? Over and over and over again and continue to speak up because it goes away after a while.
yeah,
But
and
it
it
won't
does.
go away if you never go through it,
Exactly.
right?
Because you'll always feel like it's one big thing. And then it's like, because you're constantly forced to jump it, and then
Yep.
you jump it, and then you're like, I don't want to do that again. That was scary. And then, so you don't even put yourself in those situations or positions where you're going to be forced to be put in that position again. So
You
you end
avoid it.
up, yeah, you end up capping your own career or your own potential because of these limiting beliefs. And it's a very powerful thing, this fear of whether it's failure or being viewed as less than or being viewed as not knowing what you're doing or being completely out of place.
This is so huge. And I wrote an article about it. By the way, if you go to 5xminority.com, you can read all of my
Oh,
articles. So I wrote
excellent.
an
All right.
article about this on the, for women and for Latinas, especially, it is really difficult for us to advocate for ourselves. And one of the reasons is that growing up, we are always told, and I'm going to say this in Spanish, calladita te ves más bonita. Your mom told you, your grandma told you, calladita te ves más bonita. If you're quiet and you sit down, you're pretty. And we are always told that, you need to look pretty as a girl. We want you to be pretty. And one of the things that I learned is that were not moving up into the C-suite because we didn't want to come across as showing off. And so we never advocated for ourselves. And I can tell you the first time I started doing this, Nikos, I was so uncomfortable. My whole body would feel it because I didn't know the difference between advocating for myself and coming across as a show off, right? And so I wrote an article because it was such a huge lesson for me to know that if people don't know how amazing you are,
It goes back to what we were saying earlier, right? These limiting beliefs that we are taught in childhood, they do
yeah,
impact us. And you may not be in the environment where you actually learn these behaviors and learn these attitudes, but you carry it with you throughout your whole life. And
yeah.
a
And it's
lot
the
of
same thing that
unlearning
I
you
learned.
need.
It's the same thing I learned with you, Nikos, going through the TEDx talk, and the same thing that I learned about public speaking. That when you shift your mindset, there is nothing you cannot do. Right? Going on stage thinking people are looking at me. How do I look? Am I gonna be okay? I started to think about the value that I'm bringing. Right? Who am I helping? Who's sitting in the audience that's gonna benefit from the words that I'm sharing, from my story? And so everything that it took for me to understand that public speaking was really not something that was going to kill me is to understand that I am actually of service. This is a service, right? And who someone here is going to benefit from the talk, the fireside chat. That's why I love doing those because I
Yeah,
know that I'm helping someone in the process. And so you just have to change the way you see things sometimes.
100%. And we need to talk about public speaking because that is one thing that a lot of people struggle with. And it's
Yeah.
one of those things where, people are more scared of it. I don't know how you could be more scared of public speaking than sharks. But
Yes.
apparently it's like one of the top three biggest fears. And I can't understand. I can understand it a little bit. Um, you always want to be viewed as highly competent, and that sometimes means that you always need to be highly articulate.
Mm-hmm.
And we correlate the two. And if you didn't go to the best schools, or English isn't your native language, you'll
Mm-hmm.
always feel like, well, should I say this? Should I speak up?
Yeah.
Should I put myself out there and be scrutinized? And I might not say things perfectly. Is this going to damage my brand? And,
Right.
I won't lie. I thought the same thing when I did the TED Talk. I'm like, oh, I'm not the most articulate person in the world. I say a ton of filler words or, but the reality is, so does the majority of the world, right? And
Yep.
I put myself out there, and, I won't say my TED Talk was the most perfect TED Talk
I
in the
I
world.
loved it. It's
Thank
one
you,
of my
thank you.
favorites.
But a lot of people loved it, and
Yeah.
a lot of people reached out to me from all over the world saying how it resonated with them. And
Yeah.
not one person said, like, hey, this was the worst thing I've ever seen and everything. And and just so you know, when it came out, there was a Reddit subgroup, a subreddit, basically. So basically, it's people that I don't know on the internet, and they watched my TED Talk, and they actually put so much effort into talking about how much they didn't like my arguments. But when I read it at that point, when I saw it, I had already read 1,000 comments about how great it was, and how there was an audience out there that I was of service. So when I saw there was a subreddit about how much they hate my talk, it was actually a
Mhm.
funny thing. Like, the criticism just bounced off me. And that's the thing, when you're reminded that what you have to say is of service, you're less preoccupied with how you look and how you sound. It doesn't matter.
Three things that helped me with that I want to share with you. The first one, and you talked about it right now, is that you're not here to be liked by everyone. It's impossible, right?
Yeah.
Not everyone loves my accent, but what matters is that I do. I freaking love my accent, and that's what's the most important part, that I love it. The second one is I love vulnerability, and I learn how to be vulnerable, and I learn how to go into rooms where I'm not the smartest person, and that's okay. And I learn to say, I don't know. Can you please share more? I don't understand. Can you show me another angle? I do that now. As a CTO, I did that before as a CIO. I'm an imperfect human being, and so are you. And so I know that now. And then the third thing is that I have a word of the year that I use every year. I don't do New Year resolutions. And I follow that practice for a whole year. And so a few years ago, for me, it was self love. And I spent an entire year doing different practices on how to love myself. And I love myself so much that if you don't love me, it's okay. But if you do, it's on top of the love that I'm already giving myself, you know? And if you don't like what I say, that's okay. Others will like it, and maybe there is something for me to learn from it. I'm not scared of saying something wrong and then getting the lesson and then being better after I learn the lesson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we're winding down now, Elaine, and I always ask my guests at every episode, do you have any book recommendations for us? And that maybe might be cover some of the topics we discussed today. But it
Yeah.
can't be The Alchemist, right? Because I always
No, no, but I have, oh my God, I have so many books. So let me share two. I'll share two. The first one is a book that really helped me when I first went into management. That is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective
yeah.
People.
Stephen Covey.
by Stephen Covey. And I
Yeah.
actually attended a 5-day course on the 7 habits, and I still have my talking stick. There is a talking stick that they give you during the class so that you can learn that in business you want to seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so those principles have always stayed with me
Yeah.
even today. And then the second book that I actually read it every year, is The Four Agreements by Don
Yeah.
Miguel Ruiz.
Yeah.
That book,
Yeah.
it needs reinforcement, and so I really try my best to read it every year, even if I just skim through it because I know it by heart now. But sometimes you forget when you are like so in stress and into the work, the weeds of the work. And I try to never forget to be impeccable with my word, which is one of the
Exactly. That's
agreements.
actually my favorite one. My
That's
favorite
my
one
favorite one.
because maybe that this could resonate with you as well. I'm Greek, so we're very passionate and
Mhm.
reactive and direct. And I've
Yeah.
learned that, it's not helpful if I'm like that every time, right? So,
Words are powerful,
oh yeah.
and words carry energy.
Oh my God, yeah. And when you reach a point in your life and maybe your career where people depend on you, you're
Mhm.
scrutinized much more than you were previously. And that's the benefit of sometimes being more junior in your career, right? You're not as
Right.
scrutinized. Maybe your performance is scrutinized, but what you say isn't like dissected as much. So definitely something. I actually read that. It took me like 3 days to read that book. That was
Yep,
such a good book.
it's a quick read.
Quick
Yeah,
read.
yeah,
Quick read.
yeah.
So thank you, Elaine, for joining us. Thank you to our beloved audience for sticking through with us.